Здравствуйте. David Spletnikov returns on the eve of the World Figure Skating Championships of the year of our Lord 2021. And while so many of you are saying, will Shcherbakova beat Trusova? Will Trusova beat Rika Kihira? I am here to tell you about the real important figures, the important factors of our sport of years past, the masters of Russian figure skating, the queens of figure skating. Bogini Figurnia Katania. Well, for this I looked to the true master who knows these queens better than other. The great, vaunted journalist Elena Vaitsekhovskaya, who knows them all. Her supporters consider her to be the Truman Capote, the Ronan Farrow of the Olympic sporting movement. Her detractors spit on her good name and consider her nothing more than a mere Kitty Kelly. And you know what? You may hate Kitty Kelly, but you all read that book about Diana, Princess of Wales, and you memorized every word. Well, here, I'm going to read chapters, excerpts of her writings. First, Tears on Ice, about Paseov, Linichuk, the masters of ice dance. And then we will transition to one of the great articles about Tatiana and Natalia Tarasova, written by Elena Vaitsekhovskaya. So let's start as a primer on Russian figure skating and figure skating around the world for all of those who need to know, who consider, how dare you talk about these coaches in such a way? We will give you a history lesson of what we have learned over our many years of loving and hating. And hate come from love, and love come from hate, that comes from passion, that comes from love deep down inside of all of us. For our sport, for Figurnia Katania, figure skating. Well, it starts. Yelena writes, I got my first taste of the reverse side of figure skating in all its glory at the 1994 European Championship in Copenhagen. In the previous season, I managed to get to the World Championships in Prague. Werner found a super cheap bug motel on the outskirts of the Czech capital, and while it would take us an hour to get there from the rink, the trip didn't break the budget of the still modest Sport Express. At the end of the year, Werner informed me that he had an eye on a cheap hotel in Copenhagen, if, of course, I was planning to show up there. I was planning it. Pre-Olympic Europeans, where the professionals newly returned to the sport, were going to skate just a month prior to the Lillehammer Games. Seems quite remarkable. In addition, I was approached by the Russian Figure Skating Association president, Valentin Paseov, shortly before that, at one of the Russian skating events. He had his own history with Werner. In 1992, Arthur published an article called A Black Figure on the Blue Ice. Basically, this is what really launched him as a scandalous personality. There, in his usual style, he presented his views on Paseov's role in figure skating, stuffing it not only with the excellent knowledge of his subject matter, but also with a hatred toward Soviet officials that all immigrants share. The article was replete with facts, and agglomeration of which painted a fantastically unsavory portrait. At the time, Werner had a contract with Sovietsky Sport to officially report on all international competitions as a special correspondent. Werner showed up at Prague's 1993 World Championships to morally finish Paseov off. He even ordered a t-shirt where the whole Sovsport article was printed on the back, and didn't take it off for the duration of the competition. Sport Express was then the only alternative to Soviet sport. Other media correspondents did not make it to big competitions due to lack of funding. Not that there was too much other media. In any case, during the aforementioned Russian event, I think it was in Petersburg, Paseov himself appeared at my table in an empty, semi-dark press bar. We really liked working with you, Lena, he started, after a few introductory phrases. By the way, do you plan to attend the Europeans? Hardly, I shrugged. I don't know if I can get the funding. Is that all? The eminent official seemed sincerely surprised. We will be happy to take you to Copenhagen, at the Federation's expense. We'll be happy to do so. I'll write the letter to your editor-in-chief myself." The letter was written. Moreover, the paper was jubilant. We didn't have a penny. Employees didn't get paid, and we always kept looking to sponge off, what they now call for sponsors, to pay for the trips. A couple of months later, as I was leaving the paper for the airport, I accidentally bumped into the first-second editor, Volodya Geskin. Having wished me a safe flight, he suddenly asked, "You have money?" "Paseov is paying." I shrugged. "Wait." Geskin looked into his pockets and produced a torn, dirty old bill for $20. "Take it, just in case." Just as I showed up at the rink to get my accreditation, there were just a few hours left before the start, I found a charming and familiar group. Sitting at the table were Werner, TV commentator Sergei Cheskudov, and Irina Rodnina. All three were laughing so loud that it was impossible not to join in this happy company. Having thanked Werner for the hotel and mentioning that the Federation was paying for the trip, I immediately got the question. "Did you get the money yet?" "Yet." "Then leave us immediately. If Paseov sees you with us, I guarantee he won't give you any money." I became really annoyed. "Artur, stop playing with me. Your relationship with Paseov is your own affair. He sent a letter to the paper. On his own, by the way. I didn't even ask him." "Don't be cross, silly," Cheskudov joined in. "You don't want to leave. No one is forcing you. After all, we'll scrape together something for your hotel." At that very moment, Paseov walked by our table, carefully looking at our group. A few minutes later, he walked by in the opposite direction. A little later, he appeared for the third time. Catching my attention, he suddenly asked, "Lena, a minute of your time?" I stepped aside by him. "Lena, you're new here. There's much you don't know. There are some real thugs among us. I hate seeing you sharing their table." "Excuse me. Izvinite. Whom exactly do you mean?" I asked quite cynically. Paseov realized he might have gone too far. "Well, you see, all I mean is that all people are different. They can tell you many things you don't need to hear. It would be better if you asked for my advice instead." "In other words, since you've brought me here, you believe that I should present exclusively your point of view in my newspaper." "Oh, no. How can I explain?" The reserve of politeness and self-restraint suddenly ran out. Paseov's face tensed up. "If Werner's name ever appears in your newspaper, it will be the end of our good relationship. Is that clear?" "Certainly, Valentin Nikolaevich," I smiled sweetly. "Can I get back to my table now?" 3 days later, a manager stopped me in the hall. "Excuse me, but you're leaving day after tomorrow, right? Could you pay for the room before tomorrow morning?" I rushed to the rink. I found the Federation's accountant and relayed the request. Sure, he said benignly. "Unfortunately, I don't have it on me. Could you stop by the official hotel in a couple of hours?" I waited without result in the hotel for the participants until that evening's finals. Then I returned to the rink. I again found the Federation representative. "You see," he seemed embarrassed, "as I understand, your hotel was booked by Mr. Werner. Paseov doubts the amount you requested. We'd like to check." "The hotel is just $35 a day. Here is the official bill," I mumbled. Sorry, there is nothing I can do." My brain started spinning with a crazy speed. The moral side of things didn't concern me at the time. All I was thinking was, where do I get the money? Werner, Cheskudov, Rodnina? I got out the still unbroken torn 20 from my pocket, and suddenly, instead of fury and fear, was enveloped with the icy cool that even surprised myself. I found Paseov at the Sears for the important guests. "Valentin Nikolaevich," I smiled nicely at his neighbors, whose view of the ice I temporarily blocked. "I'm sorry to bother you at this time." One more nice smile. "Could I have a few more minutes of your time?" "No, not here. Why inconvenience others? Could you step into the hall?" Outside of the auditorium, it was empty. I stopped abruptly. I turned to face Paseov. I said very calmly, but nailing each word as if I were nailing a coffin. Seeing as I've encountered some problems with hotel reimbursement, which I haven't been able to procure throughout the day, I've been forced to notify my editor of the situation. The editor-in-chief asked me to tell you personally that from this day forward, he considers any relationship between Sport Express and the Russian Figure Skating Association to be non-existent. What do you mean, Leah? Paseov tried to appear surprised. I don't even know what you're talking about. You know how I feel about you. Moreover, I continued without pausing, if you think I have nothing better to do than to chase your accountant around all day long, I can assure you that's not the case. I don't even request my per diem expenses be met. But in this situation, I believe that since you have officially included me in the delegation roster, you've simply pocketed the money. One more thing, Valentin Nikolaevich. As much of the stream was let out, the smile turned out almost sincere and the voice almost friendly. I've been warned about you before. Now, I've seen it in person. Good day. Getting back to the hotel around midnight, I went to the receptionist to try to delay the payment by at least a day. The concierge looked at me strangely. Your bill has been paid an hour ago. Much later, I realized how silly it was to be angry with Paseov. As someone who's led the federation of a sport for several decades and contributed substantially, as perverter, among others, to its demise, he was in reality an outstanding bureaucrat and a true expert at divide and conquer. In figure skating, he managed to break and crush such individuals, in comparison to whom I was like a baby chick, understanding nothing, as it turned out, in adult life. Paseov, first of all, needed a loyal journalist. I was stupid to believe in his altruism. Reminds me of Eteri Tutberidze, said Barton. Well, as we continue, we learn about Elena Vaitsekhovskaya and Queen Natalia Linichuk in part 2 of our great book. This is how my conflict with Natalia Linichuk, which was the only long-term conflict in my career. Linichuk was one of the coaches I built a great relationship with starting from that first meeting back in 1991. Natasha worked fanatically and to full exhaustion at the rink of Moscow's Olympic Sports Palace, yet all of her best students always ended up with other coaches. I remember my quite tactless question in an interview. Why does everyone leave you? I was talking about junior champions Yaroslava Nechieva, Yuri Chesnichenko, and Oksana Grishuk. Linichuk replied, That's simple. What can I offer my athletes besides torturous work? At the same time, everyone tells me that if they switch to a coach with a real name, just a year later, having exerted much less effort and nerves, they'll be attending Europeans and Worlds. This all changed in 1992 when Natalia Dubova left to the US following the Albertville Olympics. However, we should delve briefly into history. For a long time, only two coaches defined the politics and fashions on the ice and behind the scenes in Olympic-level ice dancing, Elena Tchaikovskaya and Tatiana Tarasova. Perhaps only Tchaikovskaya's students, Lyudmila Pakhomova and Alexander Gorshkov, were without rivals among Russia's dancers. The coach's second team, Linichuk and Karpanazov, had to fight Tarasova's Irina Moiseeva and Andrei Minenkov for all they were worth. Toward the very end of their career, Moiseeva and Minenkov left to the then very young Natalia Dubova. When she didn't make the champions, they helped Dubova become one of the chosen. The 1988 Olympics brought Tarasova her first ice dancing gold, yet two of Dubova's teams, Marina Klimova and Sergei Ponomarenko, and Maya Usova and Alexander Zhulin, were awaiting their turn after Natalia Besmianova and Andrei Bukin. By the early 1990s, Tchaikovskaya stepped aside from the sport to work on children's ice ballets. The dance coach's second giant, Tatiana Tarasova, was head deep in her theater, and Dubova was alone on the summit. She still coached the world champions, Marina Klimova and Sergei Ponomarenko, and right on their heels were Maya Usova and Alexander Zhulin. And finally, she coached the very young Oksana Grishuk, who left Linichuk to pair with Yevgeny Platov. This utopia didn't last. So many ice dancers in the same space can't help but breed coaching preferences. Dubova put her stakes in with Usova and Zhulin. Klimova and Ponomarenko immediately left to look for a new base. A year later, in February of 1992, they became Olympic champions under the tutelage of Svetlana Alexieva and the so-called consultant, in reality a true heavy artillery in all sense of the word, Tatiana Tarasova, who came back to the sport for them before going back to her ice theater. Dubova, meanwhile, left with her remaining students to lick her psychological wounds in the more comfortable, from the coaching standpoint, and better paid for Lake Placid. First, though, she fired Grishuk for immoral behavior and paired Platov with the still very young Tatiana Navka. The coach's plans, however, were foiled. Platov never showed up at the airport. A few weeks later, he was skating with Oksana, under Linichuk. In the aforementioned interview, Natasha told me, "I'll never take Grishuk back. I don't forgive betrayal." As it turned out, much is forgiven in ice dancing, if of course it's well worth it. The hurt remains, so to speak, for internal consumption. Very Kostornaia, if you ask me. Linichuk herself, by the way, once came to Moscow from Hicksville to start training under Dubova. Then, her mother pressured her to switch to Tchaikovskaya, just telling the old coach, "I have no future with you, whereas Yelena Anatolyevna can make me a champion." The family rightly figured that placing bets up on the proven ace, up on all of the judging intrigues, will be more productive than keeping loyal to the good, but not very experienced coach. No surprises there. There have always been plenty of well-wishers who could explain such calculus to other students. I guess it had to be this way. Someone once joked that dancing coaches should be selected in birthing clinics, because they must be born with sharp teeth. It goes without saying that Natalia was ecstatic with the triumph of being the leader of Russia's ice dancing. Dubova was too far away to count on any support from leadership, Paseov, which she never actually had in the first place, as she was too rough and independent in both word and deed in her life in Russia. Going across the ocean with all of her students turned out to be a colossal tactical mistake for the leading ice dance specialist of the country. On the one hand, Dubova, as she tells it herself, got a wonderful opportunity to train as she saw fit in the conditions that the other Russian skaters could only dream of. However, the coin had two sides. In reality, change of residence by the leading team and practical impossibility to get back led to both the coach and the skaters to stow in their own juices for a whole year without any competition, and in the confidence of having the team leadership reserve for them at least a season. That season was meant to be Usova and Zhulin's last in amateur sport, and let's be honest, was meant to bring them the Olympic gold, which was the only prize that eluded the skaters in their many years skating together. While they remained the nominal leaders, everyone understood that on Russian soil, it was Linichuk who wielded the absolute right to shuffle her remaining teams. There were no alternatives, really, and build her relationships with the judges, and start spinning the web of intrigue. In a word, create her empire. Let's give credit where it's due. This young and incredibly ambitious woman learned a great deal from her predecessors. She gathered all the scraps of others' experience over the years of her forced weight. There was the talk that Linichuk's husband Gennady is really the one behind her actions. He was supposed to be the team's brain central. Paired with his spouse's deadly hold and with its deep provincial roots, this tandem turned into a truly powerful machine. The only rock on Linichuk's way to gathering all potential contenders for the two vacancies on the Russian team, other than the one reserved for Usova and Zhulin, under her umbrella was her colleague, Svetlana Alexieva. To be exact, the problem was her skaters. Svetlana's daughter, Elena Kostornaia, and her partner, Oleg Ovsyannikov, who were constantly competing with Linichuk's Angelika Krylova and Vladimir Fedorov, and along with them eyed the third spot on the team. The second was predestined to belong to Grishuk and Platov. The 1992 nationals in Chelyabinsk were supposed to make the final determination. I naively supposed that all the talk of the bought judges that I kept hearing from all the camps was nothing more than an attempt by the weaker and less confident contenders to excuse their possible loss in the fight. Yet on the second day of the competition, after the dancers were done with their compulsories, I became an unwilling witness to the most engaging scene. Paseov's wife, Judge Anna Shcherbakova, was surrounded by the judges from this competition, and without pulling any punches or choosing her words, was driving home a very simple point. Anyone who will place Alexeyeva's team above Linichuk's in the upcoming programs can consider their careers over. Despite these instructions, the results were even. Kostornaia and Ovsyannikov lost by 1 vote. However, they also lost their whole career. Krylova and Fedorov got onto the team. They got bronze a few months later at the Worlds in Prague. And just a little later, Ovsyannikov was lured to Linichuk's camp to skate with Krylova, just as Fedorov was thrown out. The dangerous opposition was rooted out. Linichuk also owns another know-how, which is strategically brilliant and unprecedentedly simple. She accumulated a huge number of teams, all representing different countries. At the 1995 Worlds, she brought out servant teams representing Russia, Ukraine, Latvia, Uzbekistan, and Switzerland. The calculus was simple. The judges of all those countries simply had to play on Linichuk's side and by her rules. Given the system, where the winner was determined by the so-called placement sum, it was important to ensure the support of 5 out of 9 judges. That provided the majority. In that case, the skate's quality became of secondary importance. Everyone saw this. "Tell Linichuk it's unseemly to show up so much in the kiss and cry," mocked the foreign journalists. They all quoted a phrase someone has supposedly heard intoned by the ISU president Ottavio Cinquanta. "If ice dancing is ever excluded from the Olympics, we'll have Linichuk to thank for it." I could not write about it. After one such report, I made Natalia a bitter enemy. The spark that ignited our enmity for many years to come came at the 1995 Europeans in Dortmund. I submitted a report with an innocent mention of a fall that Krylova, now with Ovsyannikov, took in performing in practice, the very element that in a previous season, in a similar fall, led to her breaking her arm prior to the Worlds in Japan. The skater's mother happened to see the report. She misunderstood it, taking it to mean that her daughter broke her arm in Dortmund. She called the coach in the middle of the night, all hysterical. Without even bothering so much as to read the article herself, she jumped down my throat at the rink with many people witnessing the confrontation. "I forbid you to write about my athletes. Don't dare approach us from now on." It was all so ugly, and yet so comical, that the answer came unbidden. "Natasha, I might as well demand you stop coaching. The only thing I can think is to promise you is that your name will never appear in my newspaper again." Karpanazov tried to smooth things over. He approached me a bit later. Unfortunately, his timing was off, as despite the calm exterior, I was bubbling with anger. That's why I responded harshly to this. "Well, you see, with Jinya, please explain to your wife that I am no less an Olympic champion than she is. It's unclear who's achieved more in her career. And remember this, the paper pays me not to write about figure skating, but about presenting my point of view on your sport. You don't like it? Don't read it." Despite all this, I've always been of two minds on Linichuk. Irritation, often crossing to enmity, somehow coexisted with a purely human sympathy. In seeking the summit, Natalia walked over corpses just as did many of her great predecessors. They were just more tactful. Possibly they were also smarter. They also tried to follow an unspoken rule. Athletes should never guess of the backroom deals. You can always explain away any loss. There is no chance to convince a skater to sacrifice anything for the result if they know that the outcome has already been paid for. Then again, I doubt Linichuk cared what others thought of her. By 1995, she worked in the US and had every reason to see herself a queen. A year earlier, Grishuk and Platov won the Lillehammer Olympics, leaving in the dust the country's premier team of Usova and Zulin. Well, we heard a lot about Linichuk and getting to the throne and getting Grishuk and Platov, but a short history lesson for you as I transition to the third part of this reading is that Grishuk and Platov originally created a free program to The Feeling Begins with Natalia Linichuk prior to the 1996-1997 season. But again, like other teams before, they split with Linichuk and then joined up with Tatiana Anatolievna Tarasova. And one of the great scandals was who really choreographed the amazing performance they gave to The Feeling Begins at the 1997 Europeans and 1997 World Championships. Because even if Linichuk created the music and the original steps, who did create the choreography? And why that matters is because coaches who create programs that win often get a percentage of the skater's earnings based on that performance. So this was a cause of great debate during the season of 1997, when there were plenty of tours to bank on and shows and money to be made following the World Championships and that victory. So as we move to part 3, we now have Elena Vaitsekhovskaya talking to another queen of figure skating, Tatiana Tarasova, about the great American-Ukrainian Sasha Cohen, a little tiger who walks by herself. About a year ago, when figure skating had just begun experimenting with the new judging system, I wrote in one of my reports, "Ladies single skating has a new unbeatable leader, Sasha Cohen." However, aside from the 2 wins in the Grand Prix Series 2003, the American was unable to achieve great success. The question remains, why? American coach Robin Wagner said this about Cohen: "I am convinced that the word, as it applies to this athlete, can only mean one thing: victory." It was to seek victory that Cohen left her coach John Nix for Tatiana Tarasova in the summer of 2003. She moved to another coast from California to Hartford. She and Nix had visited Tarasova during the previous summer right after the Worlds in Nagano to choreograph programs for the new season. She probably made the decision to switch right then and there. "She always makes her own decisions," her mother Galina told me. At the age of 7.5, she went into the ice rink and signed up for classes. My husband and I found out post factum when Sasha came home. She made a good argument, explaining why she didn't want to continue doing gymnastics and wanted to take up figure skating. She took group lessons at first and then by her own initiative transferred to the Nix's group. We lived in California at the time, south of Los Angeles. We were informed in the summer of 2003 that our daughter had decided to move to the East Coast. Although she did say that she'd love it if we moved with her, adding quickly, "If that would be too complicated, I will go alone." And yes, the author did say 2003, and I know that the OCD fans here will say summer of 2002, which is indeed correct. At first, the Cohen-Tarasova relationship looked idyllic. You get so caught up in working with Tatiana that it's sometimes hard to stop. At the same time, "I've never met a coach who was such an intense and hard worker," Sasha said. "Incredible talent. Very rare. Not of this earth," said Tarasova of the athlete. "I have never met a person who will so fanatically and cheerfully torture herself during practices. Sasha takes on the workload of a man. I didn't think she could work like that." The results of this collaboration were evident rather quickly. If you remember Cohen's first appearance on senior ice, the most remarkable thing was not necessarily her skating, but her gymnast's flexibility, her gorgeous spirals that made other lady skaters look bland and even awkward. Other ladies had to count on the weak and unstable jumps of the young American. At the first Grand Prix competitions in the fall of 2003, Cohen appeared as an athlete whose programs had no weaknesses. This gave Tarasova a reason to say, "I don't care which system will be used to evaluate Sasha's skating. She will win anyway." That season, Cohen managed to beat the unbeatable in the United States, Michelle Kwan, but that happened only once during a Pro-Am competition in New York. After a win like that, an athlete grows wings, said Tarasova. They develop a confidence that cannot be obtained through any amount of practice. But then Cohen fell ill. It happened in Paris after another Grand Prix win. The whole day off after the competition, Sasha spent shopping and had developed a fever at night. When she came back to the US, she flew to Detroit to compete in another Pro-Am, then another one. Tarasova was strongly against her participation. However, Galina Cohen, convinced that her daughter can win in any condition, insisted that Sasha went. She argued that Sasha could not miss the competition because she was under contract with USFSA. Cohen lost that competition, and when she reappeared in Hartford, it turned out she had to build herself up from zero. But there wasn't time. Only a few days later remained until the Grand Prix final. Before that competition, I flew to Hartford, planning to go from there to Colorado Springs. I could constantly feel the tension between Mrs. Cohen and Tarasova. Galina was obviously flattered that her daughter was the undisputed favorite of such a prestigious competition. Tarasova was the only one present who was not at all certain of Sasha's success. She believed that Sasha wasn't prepared to win. That was exactly what happened. In the short program, Cohen fell on a triple Lutz and ended up behind Japan's Fumie Seguri. She started her free skate with a lot more confidence, but fell twice in the second half, on the triple toe and the flip. That's when the split took place, right there in Colorado Springs. On the outside, everything looked very proper. I am not healthy enough to pay as much attention to Sasha as necessary, said the coach. We parted by mutual agreement. Further, I was the one who recommended Wagner, and she followed my advice. Although Cohen and Tarasova kept telling the press that the decision to part was mutually agreeable, the Colorado Springs conflict was no joke. Many details point to that. The official press release for the World Championships in Dortmund did not contain Tarasova's name as Cohen's coach, not even as the choreographer. At first blush, the switch to Wagner seemed to benefit Cohen. Sasha stopped looking overly serious on the ice, said the prominent Russian specialist Melina Kudryavtseva in Dortmund. She and Wagner simplified the long program, and as a result, Sasha's skating acquired a lightness. Her jumps were improved, bigger, better quality. Perhaps it was time for all of her work with Tarasova to finally show. Tatiana is famous for overloading her students, making them test their limits. But when she let up just a little, decreased the workload, the improvement became obvious. It's a famous method. But Cohen did not manage to win the world title. Who could have predicted that her former coach would stand in her way to the top of the podium? And with whom? Shizuka Arakawa, who couldn't even rise above third place on her own national championships. After the competition was over, as a smiling Tarasova was telling the press why she took so long to decide to take in Arakawa, Mama Cohen stood right there being consoled. She was beside herself. In the beginning of last fall, Cohen announced that she will miss the Grand Prix series because of a recurring back injury. She had not trained for a long time. 3 months afterwards, she left Wagner. The official version, she missed California, her father, friends, and former coach. According to this version, Wagner sympathized with her student's decision. In light of all the coaching changes in elite skating, there was nothing extraordinary in Cohen's transition from John Nix to Tarasova, from Tarasova to Wagner, and back to Nix. However, there was a but. The skaters' return to California did not follow logic. Only a year and a half ago, Cohen and her mother were saying that the move to Hartford was prompted by the poor training conditions, a tiny and crowded public rink. Her then coach, John Nix, was not at all averse to the idea. He even joked that he will have more time for his favorite pastime, deep-sea fishing. The rink conditions have not improved in a year. Could this mean that Cohen simply didn't have a choice? A few days after Cohen announced her return to Nix, I received a letter from Fairfax. The reporter said that before turning to Nix, Cohen had asked twice to be coached by Audrey Wisiger. The Fairfax ice rink belongs to her family. The coach refused, saying that she was too busy coaching Tim Gable and Yoshi Anda. But privately, she reportedly said, Sasha is uncoachable. I called Tarasova before the U.S. Nationals to ask her opinion of her former student. I feel sorry for her, said the coach. It's not that I invested so much effort in her. Other coaches have spent a lot more energy. I generally pity any talent in trouble. Sasha has lost herself a little. Now, in my opinion, she made the right choice. Nix is extremely wise and an expert. I have nothing but respect for him, since we both brought our respective pairs to the Lake Placid Games. I brought Rodnina and Zaitsev, and he, Babylonia and Gardner. By the way, I don't think Sasha turned a Wizziger. She did go to Fairfax to work on her jumps with one of Audrey's assistants. But I know this much. Whoever works Sasha in the future, she has to trust that person, because no athlete can trust themselves, no matter how talented. So are you saying she didn't trust you? Obviously not, since she didn't follow my recommendations. Why did you part ways? We understood each other really well at times. I loved working with her. Sasha reminds me of a little tiger cub with large paws. You could watch her get stronger. And then she got sick. Once. Twice. Interestingly, these illnesses had nothing to do with her training. They usually followed a break in her schedule. Before Christmas, Sasha baked cookies all day and all night. The cookies were amazing. 12 different kinds. She brought me a huge, heavy box of them, and 50 boxes were shipped to her friends. But the next day she couldn't train, of course, and take those shopping sprees in Paris. I don't think that now Sasha would do something like that. But then she was making mistakes. I prefer to avoid unnecessary mistakes. If I told her not to go, then don't go. Save your energy. Sasha is tiny, and a small body like that cannot be robust. The ice is nearer, and it's easy to fall. It was her mother who made all the decisions. Perhaps I didn't speak to her the right way, didn't consider the deep internal bond she has with Sasha. We discussed very important things, but we raised our voices. I could not cope with everything that went on. The trip to the competition while sick. The results suffered from that point on. Before that happened, Sasha was skating remarkably. She took on huge workloads. She could skate her long and short program cleanly twice in one practice. I am lucky. I saw her skate and not fall. When we parted ways, I used to think that Russian coaches are too demanding of their athletes. But then I found out how things are in Japan, for example. The athlete should follow the advice without discussion. It's a law. That's how it was with Yugudin. He came to me and said, "Do what you want with me. I will listen to everything you say." As far as Sasha is concerned, she has to decide how she wants to live her life. She can make money without the sport. Such a unique athlete will find a job in any show. But the thing is, she loves figure skating with all her heart. And she really wants to be an Olympic champion. I asked, "Do you think there's a coach in the US who could deal with her personality?" I hope that such a coach is found, but he'd have to devote his whole life to Sasha and not expect any gratitude.